In the dust-worn hills of Red Brush County, a widowed cowboy named Amos Talley finds a wrecked wagon, and beneath it, a terrified little girl clutching a scorched doll. He brings her home, thinking it's just the right thing to do. But by morning, riders thunder in, hunting the past she can't yet speak. What he uncovers, stitched inside that doll, could change everything. As danger circles and old enemies rise, Amos faces a choice: run or stand. She didn't come with much, but somehow, she brought him back to life. Will the past steal her again? Or can a man who's lost everything build a family from ashes? The sun had just slipped past the ridge when Amos Talley spotted the wreck. He was heading home along the south trail, saddle creaking beneath him, reins loose in one hand. The scent of smoke reached him before the sight did. A faint, acrid sting on the wind, wrong for this part of Red Brush County. There was no firewood smoke this time of day, no campfire this deep in brush country. Then he saw it. The wagon was twisted where it had tumbled down a ravine off the main trail, half buried in dry mesquite and cracked rocks. The canvas was shredded, the axle split clean through like it had been struck by lightning. But Amos knew better. This wasn't an accident. The splintered wheel tracks above, the drag marks down the slope, the buzzard circling tight above, all said the same thing: ambush. He tied his horse to a cedar limb and moved down quiet, Colt holstered, but hand near. Two bodies lay still, one man, one woman, covered in soot and blood, their limbs awkward in a way only the dead ever manage. There was no mistaking it. Folks headed west, maybe with silver dreams. They hadn't made it. Amos knelt beside them, jaw tight. He removed his hat and said nothing for a while. Then, a sound. Soft. Too soft for the birds to hear, but he caught it. A whimper. He turned fast, eyes scanning the debris, then crouched low near the broken front axle. There, beneath the splintered wagon bed, hidden, under a quilt blackened with soot and ash, was a little girl, curled in on herself like a rabbit, clutching a scorched rag doll to her chest. Her cheeks were streaked with dust, and her lips trembled, but her eyes were wide open, glassy with fear. She didn't speak, didn't move. Amos lowered himself to one knee. "It's all right now," he said gently, voice low and even. "Ain't nobody here but me." She flinched when he reached forward, so he paused, hands up. "You hurt?" She shook her head. Barely. He offered her a canteen. She didn't take it. "My name's Amos," he continued. "I've got a ranch not far from here. You don't have to say nothing, but I'm not leaving you here. That all right?" Still nothing, but she didn't pull back when he inched closer. He slipped an arm beneath her, carefully lifting her from the wreckage. She was light, too light, and her dress was stiff with dried blood not her own. The doll she clutched was missing one eye, the fabric burned at the edges, but she held onto it like it was breath itself. Amos settled her in the saddle ahead of him, wrapping his coat around her small frame. She leaned back against his chest, silent. As they rode, the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows stretched long across the land. By the time they reached the Talley Ranch, dusk had turned to dark. Amos lit the lantern in the main cabin, stoked the fire, and laid a quilt on the cot by the hearth. The girl sat curled up, hands tight around her doll, eyes never leaving the flames. He didn't press her with questions. He'd seen too much war and loss to mistake silence for weakness. He poured her a cup of warm milk, set it on the table, then moved to the rocker near the door. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "Nobody's gonna bother you." No response. The flames cracked softly. Outside, a coyote called to the moon. Amos leaned back, staring at the beam above the mantel where his late wife's Bible still rested. He hadn't touched it in months, hadn't let anyone else either. But when he looked, back the little girl had climbed from the cot and now sat cross-legged near the fire, cradling the Bible in her lap, small fingers tracing the cracked leather cover. He didn't stop her, didn't say a word, just watched, something old and unfamiliar stirring in his chest. In the quiet, with the firelight flickering against the log walls, he made a quiet vow. No one was taking her safety again. And outside, beyond the ranch gate, hoofbeats gathered in the dark. Morning came to the Talley Ranch with a heavy sky and a hush in the wind that didn't sit right with Amos. He stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and scanned the trail leading to the ridge. The girl, still silent as dawn, was inside, asleep under a clean quilt. The scorched doll lay beside her, arms splayed like it, too, was trying to breathe easy. He'd hoped for more time, but good things rarely came without something dark close behind. A sound rolled across the land, hoofbeats, heavy and fast, not the kind a neighbor makes. Amos set the cup, down slow, then walked to the edge of the yard, boots firm in the dirt. 3 riders approached, their horses lathered and impatient. The one in front wore a silver-trimmed vest over a black shirt, his collar stiff as his jawline. His mustache curled at the edges, neat as a banker's. He didn't smile. "You Amos Tally?" the man called out. "I am," Amos answered, voice flat. "You?" "Name's Creel Danner. I'm here on account of some unfinished business." Amos didn't flinch. "You come looking for the wagon down in Mesquite Hollow?" "I come looking for what was in it," Danner said, dismounting with practiced ease. His boots crunched dry gravel. "Word is you took in a girl." "I brought home someone who needed help," Amos said, stepping between Danner and the house. The 2 men behind Danner fanned out, just enough to box him in. Their eyes flicked toward the porch. Danner tilted his head. "You see, the folks in that wagon owed some debts. And the girl? She might have seen more than she should have. Best to hand her over. We'll keep things tidy." "No," Amos said plainly. Danner's eyes narrowed. "You think you're her kin?" "Nope." "Then you've got no claim." Amos didn't reach for his gun. He didn't have to. "Then go ahead," he said. "Try taking her." A pause, the kind that lets wind whistle through it. Danner studied him. "This ain't over." "It is for today," Amos replied. Danner mounted slow, jaw tight. "We'll be in touch." When they rode off, Amos didn't exhale until the dust settled. He stepped inside. The girl sat at the kitchen table, a biscuit untouched on her plate. She looked at him, not frightened now, but alert, like she'd been waiting for what came next. "They wanted me, didn't they?" she asked, voice hoarse. "They won't get you," he said gently. Amos left before noon, riding hard to town. The girl left in the care of Mrs. Langtree, the widowed cook who lived in the side house. She didn't ask questions, just nodded when he told her, keep a fire going, keep her close. In Redbrush, Judge, Marwick sat behind a battered desk that looked like it had been held together by dust and prayer. He was older than most fences and twice as weathered. "I want to file emergency guardianship," Amos said, handing over a single page written in rough pen. "For who?" "She ain't got a last name I can use," Amos said, "but she's got no one else." Marwick read the paper in silence. "You know this isn't simple. Nothing good ever is." The judge rubbed his temples. "I'll sign this, but you'd better be sure. If anyone contests, you'll be in deep water." "I've been there before," Amos said. On his way out, he stopped at the sheriff's office. Halbrook looked up from his desk, squinting through dust-caked glasses. "You back for trouble?" the sheriff asked. "I'm here to prevent it." Amos told him everything. The wreck, the girl, Danner. Halbrook frowned. Creel Danner's got friends with influence. Used to run with a silver syndicate out Missouri way. He's slippery. "Post a rider near my place," Amos said. "Just for now." The sheriff sighed. "I'll send one out by dusk. But Amos, don't go shooting first." "I don't shoot unless I have to." That night, back at the ranch, the girl sat by the fire. She held Amos's late wife's Bible in her lap, thumbing through pages she couldn't yet read. When he walked in, she looked up. "I thought you'd leave." "I won't," he said. And for the first time, she nodded, not scared, just tired. Outside, the stars blinked over the land like tiny watchmen. But Amos knew better than to trust peace. Danner wasn't done, and neither was he. Clara didn't speak much, but when she did, it came in pieces, like wind chimes in a still room, soft and sudden. That morning, she was sitting on the floor by the fire, cross-legged, doll clutched in her lap as usual. Amos was slicing kindling in the corner, not looking at her but listening. Always listening. "He told me not to let it go," she whispered. Amos paused. "Who did?" She touched the doll's burnt hem. "Papa. He stitched it inside so Mommy..." "Wouldn't know." Amos set the knife down. "Stitched what inside?" Clara didn't answer. She held the doll up, turning it over slowly in her hands, like she wasn't quite sure it was still real. Amos moved closer, kneeling beside her. "Can I take a look?" "I'll give it back." She hesitated, then nodded once. He carried the doll to the table. Its seams were loose, likely from the fire, but one side felt heavier. Amos reached for a small pair of sewing scissors from his late wife's mending tin, and with gentle fingers, snipped along the seam just enough. Inside was a folded square of oilcloth, charred at the edges but mostly intact. He laid it flat and smoothed it open. Survey lines, coordinates, seal from the Arizona Territorial Mineral Office. It was a silver claim, full and official, mapped with such precision, Amos felt his stomach twist. This wasn't someone's wild guess. This was real, valuable, dangerous. He looked over at Clara. She sat quietly, watching. "Did your papa talk about this?" She shook her head. "Only said it would help someday, but he was scared." Amos folded the cloth back up and crossed to the fireplace. He lifted the top grate of the chimney flue and slid the map behind the fire brick beneath a layer of soot. It wasn't perfect, but it'd hold. If anyone came looking, they'd need more than sharp eyes to find it. He replaced the doll's seam, even restuffing it with a scrap of cotton. Clara took it back without a word. "I'll protect it," she said. "You already have," Amos told her. That afternoon, he saddled up and rode into Red Brush again. This time, he went straight to the telegraph office, a squat building beside the livery, run by a young man with more ink on his shirt than in his ledger. "I need to send a wire to the Territorial Mineral Office," Amos said. "Prescott, you filing a claim?" the clerk asked. "Verifying one." He scribbled the message, careful not to use names. Just a request for confirmation on a claim ID number, signed with his initials and a borrowed legal, reference from his guardianship filing. He paid in coins, watched the clerk tap it out, and waited for the receipt. What he didn't see, what he couldn't have, was the second man in line behind him, idly reading a flyer, tall, gray hat, and a scar that cut through his beard like a canyon. The man didn't send a wire. He just stepped out after Amos, mounted up, and rode east, fast. That night, Amos returned home just after sunset. Mrs. Langtry had cooked stew, and Clara had set the table with mismatched spoons. As they ate, she said quietly, "You think they'll come again?" Amos stirred his bowl. "Yes." She nodded like she'd already known. "But we'll be ready," he added. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the scrap of cross-stitch she'd started earlier. A daisy, uneven but bright. "For your wife," she said. Amos swallowed hard. "Thank you." He tucked it in the inside pocket of his coat. That night, he didn't sleep easy, not because of the danger, but because Clara had lost everything and still gave something away. And out there, somewhere in the dark, a rider was closing in. With news that the map hadn't stayed secret long, Amos didn't know when the next storm would hit. But it wouldn't be subtle. By spring, Red Brush County looked gentler than it was. Wildflowers dappled the hills like spilled paint, and the sky stretched big and blue with hardly a cloud to scold it. But Amos knew better. Pretty could lie. The church picnic landed on a Sunday just warm enough to bring folks out of hiding. Blankets dotted the meadow behind the white clapboard chapel, pies balanced on crates, and children hollered over three-legged races and sack tosses. Even Clara smiled, a small, quiet curve of her lips as she held a fresh-baked roll like it might float away. Amos had shaved, wore his cleanest shirt. Folks hadn't seen him in town company since Martha passed. Now they saw him with a little girl in gingham holding his hand. "Looks like you're walking in from the edge of the world," said Reverend Bull. Boone, eyes twinkling. "Feels that way," Amos said, tipping his hat. They found a spot near the sycamores. Mrs. Langtry had packed fried chicken and 2 kinds of pie. Clara sat on the quilt, legs tucked beneath her, doll resting beside the paper plate she barely touched. Amos noticed her eyes, watchful, like she sensed the calm wasn't meant to last. It didn't. Creel Danner arrived late. He came in laughing, shaking hands like he was born mayor. He wore that silver vest again, this time paired with a new hat and a swagger thick enough to butter cornbread. The town mayor, Tobias Grisham, clapped him on the back like an old friend. Danner pointed across the crowd, smiling, waving like he was searching for someone familiar. Then his eyes found Amos. And Clara. He ambled over slow, carrying a mason jar of lemonade and a folded paper in his jacket. "Well now," he said, voice like syrup over rust. "Didn't expect to see you here, Amos." And with such sweet company. Amos didn't rise. "Keep your voice down." Danner smiled wider. "I've got business." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded legal document. Writ of retrieval, he said, filed yesterday. States the girl was removed from legal custodians without consent. That's a lie. Danner tilted his head. Maybe, maybe not, but lies carry weight when dressed in paper. Before Amos could speak, a voice cut in. Now, hold on just a minute, said Reverend Boone, stepping forward. You're handing out court papers at a church picnic? Danner's smile flickered. I'll take my leave, he said, tucking the paper back. Just wanted to deliver a message. Amos stood slowly. You already did. Danner turned, nodding once to Grisham before vanishing into the crowd. The rest of the day blurred. Clara played by the apple orchard with the other children, but Amos didn't let her out of sight. His eyes scanned the crowd, and that's when he saw him, one of Danner's men. Lurking near the edge of the trees, too still for someone just enjoying the day. Amos, called Clara over, voice gentle but firm. She came fast. We're heading home, he told her. Mrs. Langtry packed the basket without question. As they saddled up, Sheriff Halbrook rode in from the main road, dusty and frowning. I heard Danner was stirring things, he said. Saw the court writ. Doesn't carry weight, not without a hearing. I don't plan on waiting for one, Amos replied. The sheriff rubbed his jaw. All right, I'll post 2 deputies near your ranch. Quiet watchers. You won't see 'em, but they'll be there. That night, after Clara was tucked in, Amos sat on the porch with his shotgun across his lap. The wind was soft, the stars were bright, but he didn't feel peaceful. Clara appeared at the doorway, blanket draped around her shoulders. You still think they'll come? She asked. Amos nodded. I do. She didn't look afraid, just tired of being afraid. Will they take me? He shook his head. Not if I breathe. She stepped forward and rested her head against his arm. And in that moment, he understood what made a man stay up through the night, what made him stake everything on hope stitched inside soot and cotton. Some things weren't just rescued. They were kept. Amos left before dawn, taking the North Trail by moonlight, with only his bedroll, a leather satchel, and Clara's hope stitched into his coat pocket. The stars were still out when he passed the fork toward Dry Ridge, choosing the longer route to Prescott, not for safety, but for certainty. If this silver claim was to be filed, it had to be done right, quietly, away from Grisham's courthouse and Danner's reach. The ride took most of the day. By mid-afternoon, dust coated Amos's boots and the horse's flanks. The Prescott Land Office sat in a plain brick building, with a warbled window pane and a stoop in need of sanding. Inside, a young clerk with ink-stained sleeves looked up, blinking through a thick pair of spectacles. I need to file a claim, Amos said, laying out the oilskin. Surveyed and marked. Her name is Clara. Rose, no last name. She's under emergency guardianship by order of Judge Marwick of Red Brush County. The clerk glanced at the seal, then back at Amos. You're filing it in her name? That's right. And she's... how old? 8. The clerk hesitated. It's legal, Amos added. Unusual, but legal. She's the heir. The clerk swallowed, then nodded. We'll file it. Amos signed the ledger, handed over the fee, and left before his coffee cooled. By the time he reached the ridge above his ranch that evening, the sky was turning burnt orange and bruised purple. Smoke trailed upward from the barn. He kicked the horse into a gallop. The barn was half caved in by the time he got there, flames having eaten through the loft. The smell of scorched hay and timber turned his stomach. The fence line was slashed clean through in 3 places. 2 of the horses had scattered. He saw the tracks heading toward the dry creek bed. Mrs. Langtry ran out from the kitchen door, apron blackened with soot, eyes wide. I tried to stop it, Amos. I heard 'em, but they lit it and rode off. I couldn't... It's all right, he said. You and Clara? Safe. I locked her in the root cellar soon as I smelled smoke. She's still down there. He rushed over and lifted the hatch. Clara blinked up at him, wide-eyed but steady. I didn't let go, she whispered. Her arms were wrapped tight around the doll. I didn't let go. You did good, he said, scooping her into his arms. Neighbors came within the hour, led by Rufus Kemp, an old Army friend who'd once patched up Amos in a Tennessee creek bed after a mine trap near claimed both their legs. I heard about the barn, Rufus said, squinting through smoke. Figured you might need help standing again. Amos clapped him on the shoulder. More than I can say. While men dragged buckets and threw up fresh posts, Amos watched Clara walk out into the garden. The doll still clung to her by habit. though now one arm dangled limp. She knelt beside a patch of dirt near the herb box and began to dig. "What are you doing, sweetheart?" he asked, coming over. "She's gone now," Clara said softly. "She kept me safe long enough." In her hands was the doll, burnt, stiff. It seems now empty. "I think she's tired." Amos knelt beside her. She placed the doll gently in the hole, like laying down a memory, and covered it with dirt. From her apron pocket, she pulled a tiny wild daisy and set it atop. "She deserves something pretty," Clara whispered. He swallowed. "She does." The fire was out by midnight, the stars clear again over Redbrush. But Amos knew one thing for sure. Creel Danner had made his move. And now it was Amos's turn to answer, paper by paper, nail by nail, and heartbeat by heartbeat. By mid-morning, the wind had changed direction, hotter, dustier, riding in from the south like it was dragging bad news behind it. Amos had just helped Rufus repair the last gate hinge when he saw the sheriff's wagon approach, raising a snake's tail of dust across the ridge trail. Sheriff Halbrook stepped down first, then another man followed. Deputy Clint Myers, a younger fellow with a star pinned too proud on his chest and eyes too eager for trouble. Halbrook tipped his hat, face drawn. "Amos, I ain't here by choice." Amos leaned on the post-hole shovel. "Didn't figure you were." Myers pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Court order for arrest. Accusations forgery and fraudulent land filing." Amos blinked once. "Forgery? That claim was filed legal in Prescott. Judge Grisham says otherwise," Myers added, smug. "Says you misused a minor's name to stake your own profit." "That claim's in Clara's name," Amos said calmly. "I don't touch it. I don't own it." Halbrook rubbed the back of his neck. "This didn't come from me, Amos. It came from higher up." "Myers," Amos said, turning toward the younger man, "you ever stop to wonder why a man like Danner wants a little girl more than silver?" Myers flinched, just for a second. "I'll come quiet," Amos added, lifting his hands. "Long as someone stays to watch the ranch." "I'll see to it," Halbrook promised. Clara stepped out of the house just as the cuffs clicked. Her hands balled into fists. "No," she whispered. "Go with Mrs. Langtree," Amos told her, voice steady. "I'll be home soon." "You promise?" His throat tightened. "I promise." But he wasn't sure. Not anymore. The jail in Redbrush was no bigger than a freight car, and twice as musty. Amos sat on the cot, staring at the wood slats overhead. Outside, children played jump rope. It made the iron bars feel heavier. Halbrook brought him supper, beans and cornbread, warm and honest. "You know this is rigged," Amos said. "I do. Then why let it happen?" The sheriff sat on the bench across from him. "Because I ain't got the weight to stop it." "Not yet. But that doesn't mean I won't pull the balance your way if I can. You still got the telegram from the mineral office?" Halbrook nodded. "Buried it under the coffee can in my office drawer. Figured someone might try to make it disappear." "Good," Amos said. "You ever consider that Danner's not just after the silver?" Amos looked up. "I know he's not. He wants the girl quiet. And I gave her a name." That's louder than he expected. At the ranch, Clara didn't eat that night. She sat by the hearth with Amos's old coat draped over her shoulders, small fingers tucked into the stitching near the pocket. "Did he leave?" she asked. Mrs. Langtree shook her head. "He didn't run, sweetheart. He was taken. I want him back. We all do." Clara stood and walked to the small desk in the corner. She took out a stub of pencil and paper and wrote with slow, careful effort. "His name is Amos Talley. He saved me. He's not a liar." Mrs. Langtree looked over her shoulder, tears brimming. "Who's that for?" "Anyone who will listen." 2 nights later, while the town buzzed about Amos's arrest, Mrs. Langtree rode the supply cart under cover of dark toward Prescott. In her apron were 3 things: Clara's letter, a copy of the guardianship paper, and a second telegram, this one addressed to a woman named Ruthie Morrison in Santa Fe. "She's my cousin," Clara had said. "Mama said she would help if anything ever happened." Back in the cell, Amos sat quiet. He didn't ask for bail, didn't demand release. He just looked out the barred window, one hand resting over his heart, where Clara's cross-stitched daisy sat tucked in the coat's inside pocket. He wasn't worried for himself. He was worried that Danner, somewhere in town, still walked free. And Clara was out there, without him. The town hall had never seen such a crowd. Folks poured in with pie-stained hands, Sunday boots, and more whispers than wind through corn. Word had traveled fast. Amos Talley, the quiet rancher who hadn't spoken in town for near 3 years, was about to face Judge Grisham in a fraud hearing over land rights, and a little girl caught in the middle. Amos stood straight as the judge entered, his wrists free for the first time in days. Sheriff Halbrook had quietly uncuffed him that morning, muttering, "Let's not make a show more foolish than it already is." Danner sat 2 rows back, smug in a dark coat. His lawyer, a wiry man named Trent Hess, leafed through papers like a crow over roadkill. "Court is now in session," Judge Grisham declared, rapping his gavel. "Matter, alleged fraudulent filing of a mining claim in the name of a minor. Defendant, Amos Talley." The room fell still. Amos stepped forward. "I filed the claim in Clara Rose's name. Guardianship was granted legally. The child had no family here and no protection until she landed in my care." Hess stood. "That child was not lawfully placed, and the map used for the silver claim has no verified origin." Grisham nodded slowly. "Do you have said map?" Amos reached into his coat and unwrapped a soot-marked bundle, the smell of chimney ash still clinging to it. "I found this inside her doll," he said. "Her father, killed in the ambush, stitched it into the lining. I kept it hidden because men like Danner were sniffing after what wasn't theirs." He handed it to the clerk. The courtroom buzzed. "Objection," Hess barked. "That could be anything." Judge Grisham adjusted his glasses, but before he could respond, the doors opened with a creak. Mrs. Langtry stepped in, wind-blown but purposeful, and behind her, a young woman in a traveling shawl, hat pinned firm, and eyes that cut straight to Danner. "Name?" the judge asked. "Ruthie Morrison," she said. "I'm Clara's cousin out of Santa Fe." Got the letter and came on the next coach. She handed over a birth certificate, a photograph, and a notarized letter confirming Clara's full name, Clara Rose Morrison, and her father's ownership of the silver claim. Judge Grisham skimmed it, then looked to Amos. "You didn't falsify any of this?" "No, sir." "Then why didn't you present this before?" "I didn't know she had a cousin," Amos said plainly, "but I did what I could to keep her safe until someone showed." Just then, another voice spoke up from the gallery. "I can vouch for the map." Rufus Kemp, hat in hand, stepped forward. "Amos sent me with the original telegram to the mineral office before the arrest. I kept a copy. That one Danner intercepted was forged." He held out the document, still folded in its official envelope. Judge Grisham leaned back. "Is that true, Mr. Danner?" Danner tried to stand, but before he could speak, Sheriff Halbrook was already moving. "I checked. Danner's real name is Elias Creed. He's wanted in Missouri for fraud and child endangerment." Gasps rippled across the room. Danner bolted for the back door, but Rufus blocked him. "Not today." Deputies grabbed him, the clatter of boots echoing down the hallway. Judge Grisham cleared his throat, trying to restore order. "This court finds Amos Talley's guardianship valid, the land claim legal, and all charges dismissed." He turned to Clara, who sat quietly in the front row, feet barely touching the floor. "Miss Clara, would you prefer to return to Santa Fe?" She looked at Amos, then stood, walked over, and took his hand. "No, sir," she said. "I'm home." The room, silent at first, broke into warm applause, not loud, not wild, just steady, honest hands coming together for something right. Amos looked down at the small hand in his. For once, justice hadn't come on horseback or through gunpowder. It came on paper, ash, and a little girl's truth. Danner didn't make it far. Deputy Connor and Rufus Kemp caught him 2 miles south of Prescott, hunched behind a mule cart at the crossing near Dead Man's Hollow. They dragged him back in irons, his boots muddy and his coat torn. Sheriff Halbrook met them at the jail with a warrant already stamped, thanks to Judge Grisham's swift pen and Ruthie Morrison's testimony. Turns out, Elias Creed, alias Creel Danner, was wanted in 3 states for land fraud, 1 for forgery, and had an outstanding charge in Missouri for abandoning a child on a claim in winter. He'd changed his name after skipping town on a failed silver prospect he'd stolen from a widow and left unmarked. This time, justice stuck. Back at the ranch, the sky opened wide and blue as Clara stepped off the wagon with Ruthie and Mrs. Langtry beside her. Amos stood waiting by the new barn frame, his eyes red from wind. Or maybe something else. You all right? Clara asked. I am now. She looked around the yard, half rebuilt but peaceful. The burned patch in the garden was blooming again, tiny shoots where the daisy had rooted. Is it really over? For now, Amos said, long as nobody's stupid enough to come knocking again. She smiled up at him, half relief, half stubborn courage. Inside, Ruthie helped unpack the few things Clara had left: a clean dress, a mended bonnet, and one folded paper with the state seal. Your name's official now, Ruthie told her gently, brushing back a strand of Clara's hair. Clara Rose Talley. That's what the judge wrote. Clara traced the ink with her fingertip. I liked it even before he wrote it. That evening, Rufus stayed to help raise the beams on the barn. The neighbors came with lumber, nails, and quiet pats on the back. You made believers out of folks, Rufus told Amos, balancing a rafter over his shoulder. Even ones who didn't know they were watching. I didn't do it for show, Amos said. I know, Rufus nodded. That's why it worked. At sundown, Sheriff Halbrook arrived in a fresh shirt, hat in hand. He stood near the fence post where Amos had once met him with a shotgun. You were right, Halbrook said. About what? About him. About trusting the law when it matters. Even when it don't feel fair. Amos said nothing for a moment, then replied, You did what you could. That counts. Halbrook extended a small envelope. Inside was a note from Judge Grisham, apologizing for the arrest and confirming the silver claim in Clara's name was secure, uncontested, and untouchable. Your land's yours, the sheriff added, but she's the one that's going to build something lasting. Later that night, after supper and dishes, Amos carved quietly, by lamplight. His whittling knife moved slow but sure, each curl of wood falling like feathers onto the table. Clara sat across from him, watching. What is it? A gift. She leaned forward. For who? You, he said, revealing a small, delicate figure of a girl holding a flower, daisy in one hand, book in the other. Clara touched it gently. It's me. He nodded. Thought the mantel looked empty. Just before bed, Clara stepped outside, where the wind carried the smell of pine and smoke from the distant hills. She stood on the porch and looked out over the land, not for what it was, but for what it could be. Behind her, Amos stood in the doorway. She asked me once, he said softly, if they'd come again. Clara didn't turn around. And what did you say? Not if I breathe. They stood together in the hush that only comes after fire and storm. And this time, Amos knew the quiet meant something good, not an end, a beginning. 1 year later, Redbrush County woke to spring like a hymn rising through the cottonwoods. At the Talley Ranch, the porch rails gleamed with fresh whitewash, and marigolds bloomed beneath the windows. Rufus had rebuilt the barn stronger than before, with cedar beams Amos swore would outlive them all. The once scorched garden now flourished, daisies, thyme, and a line of beans Clara measured with a stick every morning. Clara stood barefoot in the yard, dress hem dusty, holding a book open to the younger Cartwright boys, who sat cross-legged in the dirt. See Spot run, she read. Now you try. See, Spot, run, Toby whispered. She beamed. That's right, again, but louder. Amos watched from the porch, one hand cradling a cup of coffee, the other resting on his knee. There was something in the way Clara read to those boys, patient but sure, that made his throat catch. The silver money hadn't been touched. Every check from the mineral office stayed in the wooden box under his bed, unopened except to make sure it was still there. The land was in Clara's name. The future was hers to decide. He just kept the roof on and made sure the coffee stayed hot. Later that afternoon, Ruthie returned from town with a box wrapped in butcher's paper. Something for the girl, she said, setting it on the table. Clara peeled back the string, eyes wide as she uncovered a handmade dress, deep blue cotton with buttons carved like wildflowers. Beneath it, nestled in tissue, sat a small book. Her mother's Bible, rebound, restored, initials tooled gently into the cover. Clara's lip trembled. Ruthie pulled her close. She'd be proud. I hope so, Clara whispered. That night, the house was warm with stew on the stove and laughter around the table. Rufus had stayed, along with Mrs. Langtree and the Cartwrights. Even the sheriff passed by for a cup of cider before making his patrol rounds. Amos carved a new chair earlier that week, one with short legs and a high back. It sat empty for now, pulled neatly to the corner. But everyone noticed. Clara did too. After the dishes were washed and the porch lights hung, she walked over to the mantel, where the carved doll rested beside the daisy Amos had pressed in a frame. She stood on tiptoe and added something beside it, a folded slip of paper from her own notebook. The top read, in careful script, "What makes a home?" Underneath, in her handwriting, "Someone who stays, someone who sees you, someone who keeps you safe even when you are scared." Later, she found Amos outside, tying down a saddlebag. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere far, just making sure everything's where it belongs." She stepped beside him, small fingers finding his calloused hand. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You raised me." He turned, quiet for a breath. "And no one's taken you again," he said, voice firm but tender. "That's a promise." She nodded once, then smiled. The kind of smile that made him believe maybe second chances weren't just for stories. Maybe they were real. Maybe they had a name. And hers was Clara Rose Talley. The wind picked up as they headed inside, but it was warm, like it carried more beginnings than endings. Amos paused at the door, one last look at the horizon. Then he stepped in, closed it behind him, and hung his hat on the peg marked with a new tag carved in soft pine. The Talley family, estimated by Grace. And for the first time in a long time, Amos sat down at a table that felt full. Not because of the food, but because everyone who belonged was already home.